Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're listening to A Killer on the Road.
Originally, Rachel and I set out to make a documentary about an unsolved serial killer case in Long Island.
Body count along Ocean Parkway continues to climb.
Three more sets of human remains were discovered near Gilgo Beach.
Which has led us to look at other unsolved cases that were eerily similar. First, four murders in Atlantic City.
I look down the water, and if there's a dead woman down there.
Then four murders in Daytona Beach.
A serial killer is on the loose in the Daytona area.
And while the idea that one killer may be responsible for them all appears unlikely, a darker connection has emerged. We've discovered that one of the murders in the Daytona Beach case may be linked to others along the I-4 and I-95 interstates in Florida. A connection first reported by journalist Walter Pacheco.
That had plotted about 19 different cases along these popular interstates. The type of victim was the same, either a female prostitute or a known female drug user.
However, Pacheco wasn't the only one to notice a pattern.
What about these girls? Did they ever find her?
Nope.
This is another girl that you looked at.
Just gone.
Another one
Gone.
over here.
Gone. All of them have not been found at all.
Private investigator Bill Warner believes these murders along I-4 and I-95 and others across the country were committed by a special breed of monster. Serial killers masquerading as truckers, preying on women working the rest stops, were often referred to as lot lizards.
Truck stop more dangerous than the street?
Yeah, you start hollering, more people will look. But back in the trucks, other truckers will just roll up their windows and ignore it. I've seen a lot of girls disappear. A lot of my friends have disappeared. Guys try to grab you and take you into their truck and take off with you. And you get raped. You get killed. Just normal things, I guess.
Have you ever been hurt?
Yes, I've been kidnapped.
What happened?
The man got me into a truck like this. Seemed like forever he drove. And he bound and gagged me and held me in a 3x8 cellar, beat me, knocked my teeth out. I mean, it was pretty bad.
Sarah's ordeal eventually came to an end when a friend of the trucker discovered her and secretly set her free.
Did you ever go to the police?
Yes.
Did they ever catch him?
No.
It would seem we were now dealing with a whole new nightmare, one confirmed by the FBI in 2009 when they revealed hundreds of unsolved serial killings along the U.S. interstate system. Yet why did it take so long for us to uncover so many women who had been brutally murdered? And how can we stop it from happening again and again? To find those answers, Rachel and I would venture out into a new hunting ground. With our crew secretly following behind, we were now hitchhiking to one of the largest crossroads in America, Oklahoma City. Trucking is the lifeblood of this country, and without it, our daily lives would grind to a halt. But it's also a grueling job, one of long hours, constant monotony, and extreme loneliness.
I'm pretty well self-contained.
You like it that way?
Oh yeah, I like my solitude, but I also get very homesick.
Do you see other guys not dealing with the loneliness so well?
Some of them it's pretty prevalent. They're greasy and dirty, and they don't care about how they look.
If I was out here by myself,
You'd be in trouble.
would I?
Yeah.
Tell me.
One way to dress for one thing.
How am I dressed?
You dress like you're advertising for sex.
If I ran into the wrong person, what could happen?
You could die. They would kill you. They would rape you. You could be gang raped. I mean, it's crazy out here.
Of course, most of the truckers we met were good-natured, hardworking men and women, but this life attracts others as well. As we would discover, this job is also perfectly suited for picking up a woman in one state and dumping her body in another, before anyone can realize she's gone.
Oklahoma happens to have our country's two largest interstates intersect right here, I-35 and I-40. So you got truckers who are using that extensively to travel. You have pimps and human traffickers that use those same routes to extensively travel, and then they just collide right here in Oklahoma City.
Brian Bates is a self-proclaimed vigilante who's exposing the dangers of prostitution by shaming the job to enable it.
Truck stop prostitution, that is the lowest rung of prostitution. It's pretty much the people that are absolutely desperate for money. The girls absolutely know that they're sort of the bait out there for serial killing. They're the blood in the water that the sharks just can't resist. They're a part of our population that we've totally marginalized. If they disappear and you report them missing and you say, well, she's a known prostitute, there's no sense of urgency to find you. And there's a chance until someone finds the body, they're not even looking for that person.
I've been quantifying serial murder since the 1980s. Since then, I've realized that we were undercounting an entire pool of victims, which I eventually called the missing.
Professor Keena Quinnett classifies the missing as victims who are never actually reported missing, so no one, including police, are ever looking for them. And she believes for the most part they are women who often fall prey to long-haul serial killers.
When I was 15, I'd left home and I hitchhiked about 10 or 15,000 miles around the U.S., largely through truck stops and sleeping in the backs of trucks while truckers drove.
Writer Vanessa Veselka believes she could have easily become one of those missing during one particularly terrifying ride.
I get picked up by a guy, and the second we leave the truck stop, he starts to change. His manner starts to change, his expressions start to change. It's like one personality goes and another's coming. And then he pulled over, and we were by a bunch of woods. And he pulled out a knife, and he told me to get in the back of the cab. I kept saying, you don't want to do this. I know you don't want to. I mean, you can. It's your choice, but you don't want to do this. I just kept saying it over and over, something like that. And then at one point, he turned towards me, and he just said, run. And then I opened the door, and then I bolted for the woods. And I ran, and I hid in the woods, and I looked back, and I saw the truck. that was when it occurred to me that, like, I didn't know if he was in the truck or out of the truck in the woods with me. And so I just waited a really long time, and then eventually the truck drove off. In 2012, there was a story about a trucker who was a serial killer in custody named Robert Ben Rhodes.
During his career, Rhodes is believed to have killed close to 50 women, and possibly hundreds. Vanessa began researching Rhodes to try and confirm whether he could have been her attacker that day.
I started writing down a list of serial killers that I now knew were working in 1984 in that area. And I stopped when I got to 25. And that's when it really hit me. Like, these guys are everywhere. And these dead bodies are everywhere. And it's as if these women are invisible.
So how many missing are there?
How would we know? How would we know how many missing persons have never been reported as missing? It could be a couple of thousand people a year easily. Over the course of a decade, we could be talking about 20,000 people that we have no missing persons report on, and we had no idea they were a homicide victim.
Rachel and I have come to Oklahoma to examine a newfound nightmare. Hundreds, if not thousands, of murders all across the country, committed by long-haul serial killers. It's a shocking revelation that begs the question, why did it take so long for authorities to see the magnitude of this horror? Our search for an answer has led us to Terry Turner, who was one of the first to see the pattern.
2003, I was a criminal intelligence analyst with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. A female victim was found alongside the roadway. Nobody knew who she was. One of my tasks was to put communication out within the law enforcement community, asking for anybody that might have a missing person that would generally fit her description.
Terry would uncover 2 unsolved homicides in Arkansas and Mississippi that bore a striking resemblance to the truck stop homicide she was investigating.
Over the next 4 months, there were 4 more victims. They all had ties to the Oklahoma City area and to our truck stops.
It all started right here.
Yeah. And these are where the bodies were found.
Terry would amass 7 similar unsolved homicides from other states, highlighting the reality that law enforcement agencies often don't share their murder data and rarely look beyond their own jurisdictions. It's a problem that prevents them from seeing larger patterns of crime, what experts call linkage blindness, and it's disturbingly common. But thankfully, in Terry's case, a 28-year-old trucker would later admit to the murders along I-40.
John Robert Williams, implicated in as many as 14 cases, and now a fresh charge for the murder of Casey Jo Pipestep.
Williams would later claim to killing more than 30 women. But that wasn't Terry's only surprise. She also sent a request to an analyst at the FBI to search their database for similar unsolved homicides along I-40. How many came back when they did the first search?
At first, it probably ended up with about 200.
And every time the FBI expanded their search parameters, that number would grow. Terry's work would lead the FBI to form the Highway Serial Killings Initiative, a matrix that tracks highway serial murders. And when it was finally made public in 2009, what it detailed was staggering.
They have approximately 500 victims, I believe, on the victim matrix now, and over 200 on the offender matrix.
By last count, the initiative has tallied over 600 victims and over 275 suspected long-haul serial killers, and they're only the ones we know about. The FBI tries to track these highway murders using a national database intended to be a repository for all violent crimes committed across the country. The database is called VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. But VICAP has one major flaw. What's wrong with this database?
It doesn't have most of the unsolved murders or the bodies we find in it.
As it turns out, Reporting information on unsolved murders to VICAP is completely voluntary.
Since law enforcement doesn't have to enter them, it's not mandatory. People don't, for all sorts of reasons. They don't because they don't have time at the end of the day. They don't because it's an old case. They don't because maybe it's somebody they don't think much of.
I'm under the impression that we have law enforcement agencies that are entering our information into databases 24/7.
There is nobody entering the data 24/7. And so since it's not mandatory, since we don't have law enforcement agencies working together, and there's all sorts of petty rivalries, it's yet another layer that prevents even the best detectives from being able to do their jobs.
I was with the FBI for 10 years. I worked as a criminal profiler, also as the national program manager for VICAP. We now have over 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the country, and they all work off typically their own system, their own records management system.
17,000 different law enforcement agencies.
Yeah. There's only one way for us to identify any particular commonalities among cases throughout our country, and that's with the VICAP system.
But really, how effective can we expect VICAP to be when it's not mandatory?
Frankly, it's going to be minimally effective. You know, to put a number on it, it's impossible to do. I think it should be mandated because it's that important. It's a significant problem in our country. There are thousands and thousands of cold cases, unsolved homicides, thousands of missing persons, and thousands of unidentified bodies every year. And when you add these together, eventually it becomes a number that becomes insurmountable.
It would seem the serial killers we were tracking weren't the evil geniuses they're so often portrayed to be. In reality, they were sadly common. And what keeps them from getting caught isn't their brilliance, but more so our own failures in detecting them and their victims. Yet for Rachel and me, one question still remains. Did these killers know of law enforcement's inadequacies? And if so, did they exploit them to keep on killing?
Convicted of one murder, Mississippi, back in 2004. I believe her whole head was like wrapped in electrical tape or duct tape.
To find our answer, we began corresponding with John Robert Williams, the trucker apprehended in Terry Turner's case.
Wait.
Hold on.
He's calling. Are we rolling?
I have a prepaid call from an inmate's at Mississippi State Penitentiary.
Hello? While investigating a shadowy subset of serial killers who work as long-haul truckers, Rachel and I were now speaking to one of the most notorious.
I have a prepaid call from Mississippi State Penitentiary.
And his name is John Robert Williams.
Hey, John. It's Rachel, and I have Josh here, too.
Hi, John.
How you doing, Josh?
I guess my first question is, why did you decide to speak with us?
Well, I've turned everybody down over the years, you know. No one's ever heard anything from me about me, so I figured that people did it with my own words instead of media or police and stuff like that.
Do you have an idea of how many women you did actually kill?
I know exactly how many I killed.
How many?
Over 30.
Why'd you kill sex workers?
I drove a truck for a living, and it was, I guess, say, easy prey.
Do you know that by dropping their bodies across state lines, that it would be that much harder to solve their murders?
The number one rule, and this is the mistake that I made, this is how I got caught. The number one rule is never kill anyone from or around your area. Best way to get away with it is go across state lines and do your thing. And driving a truck, that's the best way to do it.
But are you surprised that it took the killings that you committed for the FBI to figure out that there were so many murders along our highways?
Apache term translated into English means violent killers. There was 2 females and 5 guys. I could be in Memphis, Tennessee, and this one guy, he'd see my truck pull in and tell me, man, come to my truck, I got a package for you. And I knew what he was talking about. He got a female in there. And I regret doing what I did. I wish I could bring more serial killers to justice.
But John, we could give you that opportunity if you give us the names of the other 5 guys.
One of them, his name is Jimmy Allen. He goes by Roadrunner. He's got a Roadrunner head tattooed on his right chest. The last I've seen him, he had talked about moving to New York because he said it'd be easier to do what he likes to do.
What does he like to do?
Kidnap women, kill them, torture them, sell them.
All right, John. Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
That was insane, guys. Are you guys still rolling?
From our call with Williams, it would seem these killers know exactly how to exploit our broken system. One that allows a man like Roadrunner, who's out there right now, to keep on killing. And while we can't take what John Robert Williams has told us at face value, we did find this man.
Felony 1 sodomy, rape, sex abuse. He's wearing a trucker headset.
While we can't confirm if this Jimmy Allen is Roadrunner, given what Williams has told us, we felt we had to notify authorities. Detective Hallmark has investigated long-haul killers and has interviewed John Robert Williams numerous times.
Right. He told us about a group, they call themselves the Net Daddy. He also told us about a guy named Roadrunner, and then he gave us a name for Roadrunner. And the name he gave us is Jimmy Allen. I can send you his profile.
However, our investigation would take an even stranger turn when we learned of a breaking news story that might connect back to one of our earlier cases.
So I just got a message from Kim Overstreet, who's one of the victim's sisters in Long Island.
Kim's sister Amber was one of the 4 women murdered by the Long Island serial killer.
Call me ASAP. Do you know about a guy named Neil Falls out of Virginia? He was shot by an escort. They found other names of escorts and an assortment of weapons as well. They believe him to be involved in other unsolved crimes.
After trying to strangle an escort that he met on the website Backpage, Neil Falls was killed after the woman broke free and shot him with his own gun. While the story was still unfolding, there were already reports linking Falls to other serial murders around the country.
Hey, Kim, it's Rachel and Josh.
Kim was growing convinced that Neil Falls could be the man who murdered her sister and wanted us to meet her in West Virginia.
I'm telling you, I'm changing my chest right now. I didn't get it from anybody else that I've read about or listened to. She's under 100 pounds?
Yeah, she's skinny.
Is she in her 20s?
Yeah, she's probably like 24.
I'm telling you. I'm just seeing a clip on my Facebook and I'm contacting you immediately.
In the midst of our search for these coast-to-coast killers, had one just fallen right into our lap.
For the past few weeks, Josh and I have been investigating a highly mobile breed of serial killer who embarks on cross-country killing sprees to avoid getting caught. It's a horror now unfolding right in front of our eyes with the breaking news of Neil Falls.
Falls' death in Charleston, West Virginia now has police in Las Vegas, Niagara Falls, New York, Chillicothe, Ohio, and other cities working working to find out if he's connected to killings there.
And now police on Long Island are also looking into Neal Falls, which has led us to Charleston, West Virginia, and to Lieutenant Steve Cooper.
The Neal Falls incident actually took place on the west side of Charleston, and they found Heather outside, clearly beaten up. She had a separated shoulder, broken vertebrae, strangulation marks on her throat, and she told us that she had just shot a man who was trying to kill her. And we entered the home and found Mr. Falls deceased in the kitchen. She had met Mr. Falls on Backpage, where she was advertising as an escort. She gave him directions to her home, and when he arrived, she allowed him in. And as soon as the door was shut behind her, he pulled up a 9mm Ruger and pointed it at Heather's chest and indicated that she was going to die. She fought back pretty hard. She felt like it was a matter of life and death. Mostly instinct seemed to take over for her.
Oh, yeah, I know.
What really connected the dots at that point, we found 4 sets of handcuffs in Mr. Falls' pockets. So as soon as we discovered that, I knew that something really much deeper and more sinister was going on here than just a typical attack on a female. See her eyes are all beat up here. We took some buccal swabs from her there. Now, she had clumps of hair missing, and at the autopsy, we found clumps of her hair in Mr. Falls' hands. She was actually sad that someone had died. When you watch her interview, every other sentence is, "He's gonna kill me. He's gonna kill me."
You're gonna kill me. Oh my God, honey. Mommy's so sorry.
These women, a lot of them have substance issues, and that can happen to anyone. You can fall on really bad times and resort to really desperate measures, and you can become a victim of a very violent, bad person. If you are weak for whatever reason, you are perfect for someone like Neal Falls.
Charleston has been especially hard hit by the opioid epidemic sweeping this country. In fact, West Virginia has the highest overdose death rate of any state in the nation, largely due to the addiction of prescription painkillers and heroin.
So here we've got opioid drug dependency issues like many other states across the country, many communities across the country. It's an epidemic, it's a problem, and that is really changing the infrastructure of crime here. I mean, the communities are walking zombies because of this.
But it's also an epidemic that feeds prostitution, creating a lethal dose of availability, addiction, and desperation that we've seen in so many of our cases, from Long Island to now Charleston. One that allows predators like Neal Falls to kill with ease.
I got a call on the 18th, and it was the assistant chief detective saying, "Hey, we've got what we think may be a fatal shooting and a sexual assault." The surprise came later when I actually saw the car. The way it was arranged is really kind of what struck me.
This is our crime scene investigator's office.
The first thing that I noticed was the shovel. And then were the cutting tools. Then you see the bleach and the garbage bag. His bag is in there too. Inside his bag were 5 pairs of white underwear, all the same. Several pairs of white tube socks, all the same. Shirts, all the same. There's 5. The thing that made me the most curious when they were describing it was, hey, there's a Rubbermaid tub, you could fit it in. He's got a list of other women he wants to visit or has had contact with. He was going into a public library, chatting with these women, writing down who he was going to first and second and third.
Seeing the instruments of Falls' crime laid out clearly demonstrates he was ready to kill. But the key question is whether he's killed before.
Whose contact we so far? Law enforcement in Las Vegas, law enforcement in Louisiana, the Texas Rangers in Long Island. There is a similarity connected to Mr. Falls that they're going to want to look into in Long Island. Mr. Falls has been active traveling back and forth across the country for nearly 20 years now. So it's, there's a lot of unanswered questions.
100% Heather has saved future women's lives. I don't think Heather will talk. She may. She just says, I don't want to be the face of all this. And I can understand that.
Kim Overstreet felt that Neil Falls' use of Backpage and the physical similarities between Heather and the Gilgo Beach Four was another reason to suggest Falls could be Lisk. She still hasn't texted. She also wanted to help us get an interview with Heather so she could learn more about Falls firsthand. Josh and I hope that these two women, who both battled addiction, could help each other in ways we couldn't. Where are you? You should have arrived hours ago. But now, after arranging to bring Kim to Charleston, she hadn't shown and wasn't answering her phone. She would have had to get in the car, drive 6 hours. It's a lot for a recovering addict to have to handle, knowing that she's going to be talking to someone who's in a similar situation as her sister. Josh and I would have to speak to Heather ourselves, but we were also worried she might think we were just another news crew banging down her door for just another story.
Hello? I'm Josh. How are you? This is Rage. How you doing? We just want to speak to her for a couple seconds, and if she doesn't want to, we can totally do that. Oh, okay. Oh, thanks.
Josh and I are hoping to meet with an escort named Heather to learn more about her encounter with Neil Falls, a suspected serial killer in murders around the country. She's lying up to me.
Thanks for taking a couple moments to speak to us. We're doing this documentary that looks at these girls from Long Island, and then there's actually 10, but these are the 4 main girls that we're looking at, and then 4 girls from Atlantic City, and then 4 girls from Daytona, and then while we're doing that, this case happened. Is it okay if our cameraman comes in? And Mike, come on in.
This is my first interview I've done ever since the day that I shot him. I haven't had one day that someone hasn't stopped by. I mean, they come through the gate and are beating on this door, and if I don't answer, they're beating on this door. I mean, you see how close that is. I haven't had a break. I've always been pretty open and honest about what I am, who I am, what I do. It is degrading kind of that I had to choose to prostitute to pay for, my house and my habit. It's bad that, it's all over the media and everything now. The last thing I would have believed that Neil Falls would come to my house and try to kill me. And I knew he was going to kill me as soon as he walked in the door. You could see it. His eyes were black. He stuck the gun in my stomach and he said, live or die. He said, I'm going to prison for a long time. There's no doubt about it. It's your choice whether it'll be for rape or murder. But he wasn't trying to rape me at all. He knew how to keep me quiet, and he knew how to stay right on top of me, He was good. He was good. See this prong, see how it's stuck up in the hair? This actually probably saved my life because he put that gun down. I didn't realize it was there until he pulled the rake out of my hand. I seen the gun and I just grabbed it and thought. I saw him, he was
was right there. And I guess hit him in the face and he went down. And I could finally breathe. That's all I remember is I could finally breathe, and I looked over and I seen him, and he was just going down, and I just took off out this door. Wonder how long he's been killing. Wonder how long. They said 10 years or more. That's crazy. It was really sad, actually. All these cases we're working on are unsolved. Do you think they're false? I don't know. I know that everyone's talking to West Virginia right now to find connections all over the country. One of those places is Long Island. Neil Falls' DNA is currently being analyzed by law enforcement around the country, but we won't know if he's linked to other cases, including Long Island, for months. Meanwhile, the paths of addiction, sex work, and serial murder continue to intersect in towns all across America, leaving behind a trail of bodies and a broken system that forces women like Heather to be the first line of defense against men like Neil Falls.
Rachel and I have traveled halfway across the country, following a trail of serial murder that extends from Long Island to West Virginia, which has now led us to hundreds, if not thousands, of unsolved killings across the U.S. Killings that we can't sufficiently track because of a lack of data and a broken system. Yet despite this tragedy, there's still action we can take. And now we've met with a journalist named Tom Harper, who's leading the charge to fix this problem.
The reality is you're messing this up. Too many killings go unsolved, and there is nobody who's really trying to connect the dots.
To connect those dots, Hargrove and his team began collecting homicide data from all 50 states, and if necessary, filing lawsuits against those states that refuse to make their data public. What he's created is the most comprehensive database of homicide in the U.S., one more thorough than any government agency. He calls it the Murder Accountability Project, and what it reveals is alarming.
Back in the 60s, we used to solve about 90% of murders. Now we're solving less than 2/3. And that's counterintuitive because there has been several scientific revolutions in the last 30 years, including DNA. Despite that, something like 5,000 killings go unsolved every year in America. This is the rate at which we solve murders. And as you see, that line is declining over time.
With solve rates falling by on average more than 30%, one can see why many would rather not make this data public.
It is an astonishingly fragmented law enforcement system, each one of which are very dedicated to maintaining their own turf. They don't want to be embarrassed, and so if they've had unsolved murders, I guess they don't want to tell the world about it a lot. There simply is no accountability. Nobody is looking over the shoulders of local law enforcement to determine the rate at which murders get solved and whether something should be done differently to try to solve those murders.
Now armed with this one-of-a-kind database, Hargrove has created algorithms that can detect repeating patterns.
If a serial killer is active enough, he will leave a statistical trace. And so what you're looking for is red. And there's a lot of red here.
In 2012, Hargrove's data picked up a pattern of unsolved homicides in Gary, Indiana, that police had failed to connect.
The algorithm detected a cluster of 15 women who were strangled. And we wrote a letter to the chief of police in Gary, to the mayor, and to the coroner in Lake County saying, we're pretty sure that there are 2 serial killers operating in Gary. There was a break in that case.
Darren Van is in isolation after having claimed responsibility for 7 murders and alluding to the possibility of more.
Tom Hargrove has just received the data from 2013, and he's asked for our help in identifying new clusters. In other words, we can help Tom identify active serial killers that police either don't know about or can't see, that are operating in their own backyards. Once you look through this data, you're going to tell us where we should be going.
Yep. That's all I could ever do is to point your shovels. But I think we need your help. It is highly likely that you'll be able to identify a previously unidentified serial killer.
With Tom's help, we now have the tools to detect serial killers that no one knows yet exist. But before we can delve into the data, we must first turn our lens to one more case. Possibly the ultimate example of what happens when broken systems run unchecked. A case of 11 sex workers unearthed in a desert trophy garden. A case which some are suggesting has eerie similarities to Long Island.
The lead investigators in the West Mesa buried bodies case are keeping a close eye on developments on Long Island.
Next time on The Killing Season.
This is the largest suspicious cluster in the nation. If there's a pattern there, it will be obvious.
Police are making horrifying discoveries. Today it only got worse.
You guys have a lead suspect in this?
Why are you the first documentarian to ever come to my city and do a story on this?
I know what he is. I know who murdered her. And I know why. When the girl was getting found dead, you would tell all the girls on the street that he killed them.
That was the first thing I heard, the first thing I heard, the first word of warning I heard.
You guys, be careful.
Yeah.
Don't open up a can of worms.
Why?
It's dangerous.
This is the New Mexico State Fair. They call it the biggest show in New Mexico. The family that comes down for the day is coming down to have hot dogs, the popcorn, the rides. And then in the shadow of it, literally, is these traffic girls who are brought in from across the country to come work here in New Mexico. We talk about West Mesa a lot. Nothing's been solved. Nothing's changed. You know, if they're not careful, they're going to get in the car with West Mesa Killer because he's never been caught. We actually have guys out there who claim to be the West Mesa Killer when they pick the girls up and attack them and rape them in order to make the girls more compliant. The upper echelon would say, let's just stop dwelling on it. Let's move past it. But the truth is, how do you move past it? We're still in the middle of it, for God's sake. He's like the boogeyman now.
Following a trail of unsolved serial murders across the country,
Rachel and I have uncovered a disturbing reality. A broken system of policing that allows hundreds of active serial killers to go unchecked, and an untold number of victims to go unnoticed.
There are thousands and thousands of cold cases, unsolved homicides, thousands of missing persons, and thousands and thousands of unidentified bodies every year. And when you add these together, eventually it becomes a number that becomes insurmountable.
With 22,000 different law enforcement agencies failing to communicate and none required to share their crime data, journalist Tom Hargrove has taken it upon himself to compile the most comprehensive murder database in the country.
The reality is we're messing this up. Too many killings go unsolved, and there is nobody who's really trying to connect the dots.
And now Tom has shared with us an algorithm that can detect unknown serial killers. But before we delve into the data, there's one last case that demands our attention. One with eerie parallels to Gilgo Beach that has some suggesting a possible connection.
The lead investigators in the West Mesa buried bodies case are keeping a close eye on Long Island.
As we shed light on a real-life nightmare in Albuquerque, New Mexico, one that's given rise to a boogeyman, we still roam the city streets, and a desert burial ground known as the West Mesa. Our story begins in 2007, when reporter Maggie Shepard was writing an article about sex workers and the city's vice unit.
I took a ride along with the missing persons department with Ida Lopez, and she was actually working with the vice unit at that time. And we drove up and down Central Avenue. And when I asked, why do you think it's important to pick up these women and arrest them? She reached over and she opened her glove box and she pulled out this piece of paper. And it was a Xerox sheet of faces of all these mugshots. And she said, these are my girls.
Detective Lopez had noticed a pattern of sex workers, all fitting a similar profile, who had disappeared over the previous 5 years.
I was like, oh my God, how did I not know about this? How have we not talked about this? Why hasn't the chief been like, here's 12 missing women? You know, how can that possibly be?
It should be noted that Ida Lopez, who's now retired, originally agreed to an interview, but the Albuquerque PD overruled her decision.
So at first I was infuriated. Then I was like, okay, I have to tell this story.
Shepard's article, which profiled 16 missing women in all, was met with a wall of silence from the public and authorities.
There was no outreach from police, and I didn't get one extra phone call. Not one.
But 2 years later, her phone did ring.
We were sitting in our newsroom, and I got a call, and they said, Maggie, you remember that story you wrote a long time ago? And they're like, we just found some of those women.
The woman walking her dog found a bone which led to this mass grave.
Investigators say they've discovered 2 more sets of remains.
3 more skeletons found on Albuquerque's West Mesa.
The body count rises on the West Mesa.
Authorities positively identified 2 more of the women found buried on the West Mesa.
The largest crime scene in Albuquerque history.
11 women and an unborn child, all unearthed in a 100-acre dirt lot out on the West Mesa.
The person responsible for missing persons may still be in Albuquerque. They may or may not still be on this earth. We don't know.
Police would uncover the skeletal remains of 11 nude women buried on the West Mesa, a desert plateau overlooking the city that had recently been opened for housing development. Most of the missing have been young Hispanic women who resorted to sex work to feed their addictions. The first to disappear in May of 2003 was 22-year-old Monica Candelaria. Monica's family is still troubled by a mysterious call, claiming her body had been dumped out on the mesa years before she was found there. Then there was the youngest victim, Jamie Barella, only 15 when she vanished with her cousin, 22-year-old Evelyn Salazar. It's assumed Jamie wasn't a sex worker, but she was following in the footsteps of her older cousin, who's involved in the local drug trade. Most of the other victims were last seen on Central Avenue, which runs through an area infested with drugs and violence known as the War Zone. Finally, there was Michelle Valdez, the last victim to disappear, just 4 months pregnant when her body was unearthed. Incredibly, of the 11 women found on the mesa, 8 were on Ida Lopez's original missing list. So here we are again, making another difficult journey to meet loved ones who've been left with no answers and no justice. And it's a feeling that's becoming all too familiar.
I was Doreen's best friend growing up. I just think, like, what could have happened? Where would she be today? You know, today I'm married and I have children, and I just think, would she be here too? Sorry. I just feel like maybe she could have turned her life around. You know, she never got that opportunity. She never got that chance. What are they doing? What is being done today to know that this is still not going on, that there's still not someone out there murdering girls?
My daughter was a sister. She was a mother. And she was a good person. When Michelle first went missing, the police said, well, until we have a body, there's really not a whole lot. I said, well, hell, there's not one going to fall out of the damn sky in your lap. You need to get out here and talk to people. I have yet today get an answer for any of the specific questions that I have asked Albuquerque Police Department.
There's been a huge amount of finger pointing at the police. And once it started to become clear who the women were who'd been killed and buried out there, the obvious question for everybody to ask was, how the did you not know there was a serial killer operating in the city right under your noses?
Rachel and I reached out to the Albuquerque police to hear their side of the story and to get an update on the case. But we're told no interviews would be given, which has now led us to try a less official route.
The task force is called the 118th Street Task Force, and they're saying if you have any information, you may call Detective Mark Mannery. Have you tried calling this number?
I don't think so. You kidding me?
Let me try the other one.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, how you doing? Can I get the number for the 118th Street Task Force?
The 118th Street?
Yeah, the task force to find all the women who are killed out on the mesa.
Okay.
I'm looking at at the website. Is that number familiar to you at all?
It's not, but if they need that number, I would try it.
Both those numbers don't seem to be working.
I don't know them.
How hard are they making it for people to give tips?
Much like in Long Island and Atlantic City, the Albuquerque Police Department's refusal to talk was all too familiar. But the deeper we dug, the more we began to wonder if their silence wasn't rooted in something far more sinister.
Protesters brought their message straight to police headquarters, asking that the victims not be forgotten and that police find a killer soon.
It's a case that after 7 years has left many frustrated and angry.
Why is this not a bigger deal? Why are you the first documentarian to ever come to my city and do a story on this?
Jeff Proctor has been covering these murders since the beginning.
It's one of the largest unsolved serial cases in the history of the country. And I think it's a bit of a black eye, frankly, for the police department here. There's never been a press conference where they stood up and said, we made some mistakes, that we are bringing back some dignity and some damn self-respect for the families who had to unceremoniously bury the skeletons of their daughters.
How do you answer those people who are wondering why more wasn't said about these women?
A lot of investigation, a lot of time has been spent to these folks. We don't believe anybody is a throwaway person at this point in time, and nothing further to add.
The commander, the guy they gave us to interview for the story we did at the beginning of last year, did not know very much about the case.
Do you guys have a lead suspect in this?
No.
He actually laughed and said no.
My sense of it at the time was I knew more about the case than he did. I will just say that I think there are detectives who have been involved in this investigation through the years who believe they did solve the case.
Some speculate the West Mesa killer may be a man named Lorenzo Montoya.
December 17th, 2006, police are called to one of the most bizarre crime scenes most of them had seen.
Montoya had strangled a stripper named Sharika Hill in his mobile home before being killed by her pimp, secretly waiting outside.
Police say Montoya had tied Hill up with a rope made out of duct tape. The way the rope was made suggested Montoya had done it before.
See basically his trailer right there?
The thing is, I mean, look at all these mobile homes, look how close they are together.
Mm-hmm.
And if he did it in the same fashion he killed Sharika Hill in, you think he got away with that 10 other times? Another red flag for police was Montoya's trailer, which was located just minutes from where the bodies were found.
Can we just see the route from his place to the burial site? It was easy for him to go on this road all the way back in the day. These were just dirt roads.
Yeah, this is all developed now.
Except for the burial site. Alright, so we'll go right from his trailer to the dump site and see how close it really is.
They're still developing out here. But there was a final reason to suspect Montoya. He was killed in 2006, the same year women stopped disappearing off the streets. So did the murder stop because Montoya died, or was there another reason? And he, just a convenient scapegoat?
So right here is the mesa. This is the burial site.
What's the odometer say?
2.6. Want to go take a look?
Yeah.
This was the largest crime scene in America at one time. And so the bodies were buried down in there. They had excavated 75 football fields worth of soil. And they found 11 bodies here, plus a fetus.
You take things to the mesa, get rid of them. That just means whoever did this just considers these women trash. Standing on the mesa, we realized we could actually see Montoya's trailer park. See that huge space?
Oh, right there?
Yeah. But did that prove his guilt? We've interviewed mobile killers who've traveled hundreds of miles to dispose of bodies. But what about a stationary killer? Had Montoya traveled less than 3 miles from his home to build one of the largest cluster dump sites in the country?
I think Montoya was the easiest suspect for police to point to. But the investigators whose skills I had a lot of faith in felt like it was not Montoya. Because, to be very crass, typically these serial killers would take the trash a little farther away from where it is they eat.
For a police force with few answers, Montoya was the perfect suspect. A dead man who couldn't argue he wasn't the murderer. Yet the mesa hadn't given up all its secrets. It would seem there was still one more clue, buried in that ground. After finding 11 women in a mass grave, Albuquerque police would point to Lorenzo Montoya as their most likely suspect. However, that narrative would change when a clue was unearthed on the mesa.
Whoever killed those women was very, very careful and meticulous. The only piece of physical evidence, in fact, was as they began to do the excavation and unearthing, they found this tag.
A tag for a tree bought at an Albuquerque nursery was discovered in the makeshift graves.
Police traced this tag to a local nursery frequented by a landscaper named Joseph Raymond Blea, whose DNA was found on a deceased sex worker back in 1985. Then in 2010, Blea's DNA matched a 26-year-old rape kit that had finally been processed, tying him to 4 rapes of young girls in the 90s. In 2014, Jeff Proctor wrote an article revealing Blea as a suspect in the West Mesa murders, which led to a reply from Blea himself.
A lot of what the letter focuses on is sort of his argument that he's being held in the county jail unconstitutionally in violation of his speedy trial rights.
They were keeping him in because they felt that he was
the West Mesa murderer. He's a guy who had a lot of kind of violent sexual fantasy stuff and somebody who was supremely intelligent. He never addresses the West Mesa case by name anywhere in the letter. He never writes about, hey, you named me as a serial killer. I'm not.
Wanting another opinion on Blea and Montoya, we contacted amateur profiler Peter Brent, who, in addition to Long Island, had been closely following the West Mesa case.
Why do you believe Montoya is not the guy?
Whenever in the last 500 years has someone ever encountered a serial killer who built a cluster dump site 2 miles away from his home? The record holder is still Ted Bundy, 120 miles. They don't bury their victims in their backyard. They never do that because they want to keep them. Even if they are caught, they want to keep the thought, but I know where my victims are. I know where my girls are.
What about Blea, Joseph Blea?
If it's possible, even less a candidate than Montoya. In the 80s, he hunted for 13, 14-year-old girls, always around the same school. So he neither has the crime scene control nor the adaptability to hunt in a wider area, nor was he ever interested in adult female victims. It doesn't make any sense.
Does the amount of victims tell you something? I mean, we're talking about 11 women.
It's too big for one individual. A dump site that size would also be a strong indicator for a pack.
A pack? More than one killer, you're saying?
Yeah. Because true doubles. True doubles is when you take 2 victims at one time.
And you're talking about for Jamie Barella and Evelyn Salazar?
Yeah.
In 2004, cousins Evelyn and Jamie disappeared while on their way to a local park.
You have to control 2 victims and to drive at the same time. You run simply out of arms unless you have an accomplice, at least one. To build that big dump site is another indicator for backpacks. Usually, if they build dump sites, they build bigger dump sites because they have this high kill frequency, because they always spur each other on to go for more.
Peter's pack theory seemed possible, even more so when we considered other women who had disappeared off the city's streets around the same time. Women who weren't yet considered victims because their bodies were never found, and so they've remained as simply missing. 2007 Albuquerque Journal publishes a list of 16 missing women. This list came from Ida Lopez, who was a missing persons detective back then at APD. Fast forward 2 years to 2009, the 11 women are found on the Mesa. Out of those 11, 8 were from Ida's original list. Where are the remaining 8? Out of the 16 women on Ida Lopez's original list, 8 were found on the Mesa, leaving 8 behind. 2 were later found dead in unrelated cases, and 1 presumably trafficked to Mexico. Police would then add 3 more missing women who fit the profile, giving us a new total of 8 missing women who might very well be additional victims of the West Mesa killer.
Fewer people have looked into these, so maybe there is a clue.
Nina Harone's interesting. Her family has been actively searching for her still. Nina Harone was young, Hispanic, and struggling with addiction, fitting the profile of most of the women found on the Mesa.
I want closure. What am I supposed to tell her son? I can't say that she'll be back because it's been almost 8-9 years. You know, it's hard just not knowing.
To help find her daughter, Teresa contacted a private investigator, a former FBI agent who specializes in missing persons.
I think it could be the same person that abducted Nina could be involved in the West Mesa murders. We have to get information. Somebody knows something. So we put out a flyer with an 800 number. And lo and behold, we got a a phone call.
Hi. You know who I am. I know who murdered her, and I know why. The people that murdered her are now in California.
Private investigator George Walker believes this message about Nina Harone could lead to the West Mesa killer.
He says, I know what happened to Nina, and I know where she's at, and I know who took her. The only person who knows where Nina was is the people who were involved in abducting her and or killing her.
We played the message for Nina's mother, hoping she could shed further light on its source.
You know who I am. I know who murdered her. They're not in New Mexico, they're over in California.
Do you recognize that voice?
It sounds like Ronnie.
So what was his relationship with Nina?
He would just house girls from the street. I mean, they would go in and out.
According to Teresa, Ronnie ran with a rough crowd. Among them, a man named Sam, who had a reputation for being violent.
Did you suspect that Sam might also have something to do with this?
By his anger and stuff, yes. By the way he used to treat the women, yes.
Have you talked to Ronnie about this?
No. Really, no.
Why not?
Oh, I get shaky talking about him.
Are Ronnie and Sam dangerous?
I think they are.
Not wanting to jeopardize an open case, Walker handed over the voicemail and information on Ronnie and Sam to Albuquerque PD. And while he's hopeful they chase down this lead, given their track record, we weren't so sure. But we also uncovered something else. Sam had left town soon after Nina's disappearance. But so did one of Sam's sons, who'd been arrested for battery and drug trafficking. And to our surprise, this son had also moved to California. Which is why we're headed to speak to Ronnie ourselves. If we could prove he made the call, it may lead us to Nina's killer.
It's not what I do.
But that meant getting Ronnie's voice on tape.
Oh, well, that's it. You rolling?
How you doing? You're Ronnie. I'm Josh Zeman. How are you, sir? Hi. So, we're looking for some of the girls who were on the Mesa.
I have nothing to do with that.
Well, I know you have nothing to do with it, but
I know Nina.
You know Nina?
That's it.
Uh-huh.
You're friends with a guy named Sam?
Sam, he's all right.
Yeah? You ever have any run-ins with the son? No.
We know each other. He works out in California.
So do you think it was a serial killer?
My best guess probably was a cop or something.
Really? A cop, huh?
Well, everybody's got their opinion.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You guys, be careful.
Yeah?
Don't open up a can of worms.
Why?
There's a lot of people out here. It's dangerous.
Is it?
He's all right. He works out in California.
California?
He works out in California.
Teresa's right. That does sound like his voice. I think he made that phone call. But I also think he was intoxicated. I think it is him, though.
It'll take a few weeks to get the recording analyzed by an expert, but if it's a match, it could help us push this case forward. And while we can't assume the mention of California on the cryptic message is linked to Sam's son in California, we wondered if this was the can of worms Ronnie was warning us about. But Ronnie's mention of the police being involved also got our attention. Of course, he might be trying to deflect suspicion. But we've heard this theory so often, it became impossible to ignore.
Look, can I talk to you for a second? I'll pay you $20 to have a conversation. Come out here. Who do you think killed all these women?
the girls say that it was the cops that did it.
What do you think?
I believe that.
I heard it was a cop. I heard it was an Albuquerque cop.
Personally, I think it's APD has something to do with it. I really do.
With all these, sorry to say, but crooked cops, yeah, it is very possible.
I thought about that too, because Julie was afraid of a police officer by the name of. I have been told by 2 or 3 women that police officers have taken them up to the West Mesa and raped them and left them there.
I believe that. APD's behind it. He used to be the captain of twice. He was going around raping girls and stuff like that.
The only ones that know how to get out there is cops.
He's living at large. You know, he got away with murder more than once.
We'd often heard rumors that a member of law enforcement could be the killer in our other cases, including Long Island and Daytona, but none more so than in Albuquerque. And on Web Sleuths, a user with the handle The Seeker, who was ex-law enforcement herself, also believed it was possible.
How many times have you heard that it's Albuquerque Police Department?
Lots of times.
What do you think about that?
Honestly, I can tell you that some of the scariest people I know are law enforcement or ex-law enforcement. Well, I'm ex-law enforcement, so it attracts a certain personality type. I think there's definitely some involvement for sure.
For sex workers, the road cop theory is simple. The reason why their killer hasn't been caught is because he's one of them. The deadlier version of the same cops who arrest, harass, and sometimes rape them. On the flip side, police contempt for sex work is well known. Cops even have slang for crimes committed against prostitutes, saying they have no humans involved. And while a few officers in Albuquerque have been charged with raping sex workers, the problem here goes far beyond a few bad apples.
The Albuquerque Police Department is very much in disarray at this point. And it's a police department that's had huge problems with corruption of a number of different kinds and use of force issues. They have one of the highest rates of police shootings in the country.
Good evening. The hammer came down on APD today. The 18-month federal investigation found a police department out of control.
The 46-page report that DOJ released today isn't just about APD's high number of shootings. It's about a police department with a number of deep-rooted problems that have gone unchecked.
Cops killing civilians, corruption, and civil rights violations have gotten so bad here. The Department of Justice has installed its own monitor, the sanction imposed on only 1% of departments nationwide. And while these system failures are real, the road cop theory was only an urban legend. That was until we met Desiree, the cousin of victim Veronica Romero.
So these are the girls found on the Mesa, right? Who did you know?
I knew Michelle, Evelyn, Veronica, Jamie, Monica, Victoria, and Cinnamon.
You knew all these women?
And some of the ones that are still missing. A lot of them I went to elementary school with, too.
So,
I personally think it was the cops.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And who?
Anyone in particular?
You don't want to say. You've had a run.
Yeah.
What happened?
She arrested us and didn't end up taking us to jail.
What happened?
Well, beat us up and left us on the west side.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
He beat you up?
Yep. I'm afraid it's like, yeah.
So did you think he was going to try and rape you?
I don't know what he was going to do.
But do you think he was going to do something?
Yeah.
Have you spoken to anyone specifically that you know that he raped?
Just her, Victoria.
Desiree's claim was a serious one. That a vice cop who allegedly had a history of violence against some of the West Mesa victims might be involved in their murders. But even more disturbing, this wasn't the first time we'd heard this name, which meant before going further, we needed corroboration. Christine Barber runs a nonprofit that tries to protect sex workers out on the streets.
We've been talking to a lot of women up and down Central. as well as the family members. And there's a few names of cops that come up. One of which is this guy. Is his name ring a bell?
Yes, it does. Since I started doing what I did in 2009, that was the first thing I heard, the first name I heard, the first word of warning I heard. Really? Was against this person. Over and over and over and over. And recently, 2 weeks ago, it is a rumor, the rumor just won't die. There's another rumor. There's a lady, she met someone who actually saw he has a binder full of all the books he's written.
Have you seen this book?
I have not seen this book, no.
While the vice cop in question has since left the force, the rumors surrounding his exploits have only grown. Wanting to put these stories to rest once and for all, we called him and left a message. And 15 minutes later, our phone rang.
Rolling?
My name is Josh Zeman, and doing a documentary about the West Mesa murders, you knew all these girls, right?
So you should have announced. No, I think I arrested her twice or 3 times. I know when they said cinema disappeared, I said somebody killed her. And when I kept saying the girls are getting killed, nobody would believe me. I said there are certain things that I'm finding in hotel rooms, like birth certificates for children, and a hooker wouldn't leave. Somebody's killing them, and everybody said I was crazy. And I'm just kind of sturdy.
You're kidding me. Do you believe it was a serial killer?
You know, that's how you do it. 40%, but 60% of it, I believe it was drug dealers that were trying to take over the market. They were really trying hard to take over the crack cocaine business, and they were really ruthless. After a girl was kicked down there, we told them we did it, so we scare them to stay off the street. You know, that was just a tactic we used.
Wait, what was that again? One more time?
We would tell all the girls on the street that we killed them to scare the girls to stay off the street. One of the girls that was really acting like that. We had a policy on APD when you arrested somebody for prostitution, you always took a Polaroid of the person.
You don't have a book of your own, do you?
I have some that I kept, but not like the books that we had. We had photo album books, but I don't have that many. I might have like 30 or 40 that I was arresting and stuff.
We did read that there were some allegations made against you yourself.
Look, there's always things to raping and stealing their money and stealing their gold. You're not done anything not to go to jail. So you're always getting accused of something. That never changes. But you gotta understand these hookers will keep them going on their birth certificate on you. That's just the way it is.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. We told the women that we killed them in an effort to keep them off the streets.
Amazing.
Is that real? Or is he just creating a story?
No, I believe that's a tactic.
Because he knows the allegations are against him.
No. I think that is a tactic. Absolutely. To put fear into these women.
To our surprise, this cop told us perhaps the only plausible reason as to why so many suspected him. As for the other allegations, we couldn't confirm. Yet most rumors have some kernel of truth, and there was no denying the Albuquerque Police Department was fundamentally broken. Which means they too must share in the burden of 11 dead women, and maybe more. "11 women were unearthed in a desert burial ground known as the Mesa. But as we've come to learn, the Mesa is never quick to give up all its secrets. Namely, who's responsible. So far, our investigation has yielded a number of suspects and theories. From men like Montoya, to Peter's pack idea, to a vice cop's explanation for disappearing women. But Rachel and I have come to realize that each one is in fact a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that's forming right before our eyes."
So 11 victims, all found on the Mesa, almost all of them working on Central. But let's look at what connected them outside of that.
Okay.
So the first, most obvious, is Jamie and Evelyn, right? Because they're cousins. Veronica Romero and Cinnamon Elks knew each other through Romero's cousin Desiree Gonzalez. Julie Nieto and Victoria Chavez, we heard, were friends.
While we've learned these women all knew each other in some form or another, there was something else. We've uncovered numerous instances where family members received calls that their loved ones had been killed and dumped out on the mesa months or even years before their bodies were ever found there.
My youngest daughter got a call from a little girl that used to be our neighbors and said, I'm sorry to hear about Michelle, that her and a girl named Cinnamon had been stabbed a bunch of times and thrown out on the West Mesa.
You received a lot of phone calls? Yeah. I don't know what was some man. And he said if I gave him $5,000, he'll tell me where they're buried.
It was a call,
Yeah,
an anonymous call.
because they had heard Monica was thrown in the mesa.
And then there was the call Cinnamon Elks' mom received from a woman who'd heard that Cinnamon and victim Michelle Valdez had both been killed and dumped out on the mesa. In an eerie twist, the caller was Virginia Cloven, who was later found buried with Cinnamon and Michelle in that same mass grave.
So, is this some random serial killer who's picking people off? Or is this something more?
It seems like there's definitely something more here.
So the idea is maybe it's not a random serial killer. How would all these people know beforehand?
Yeah, I've often wondered that.
But if it wasn't a serial killer, then who was it?
In 2004, Michelle's father, Dan, told me that Michelle was in jail in Arizona. So Dan and I made a trip to Kingman, Arizona, and got Michelle out of jail. All the way home from Arizona, all she kept saying was, oh my God, at least they didn't find what was in the gas tank.
The gas tank?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think that was?
Drugs. I think they were running drugs in a stolen vehicle to Las Vegas, Nevada.
Do you get the feeling maybe that there were numerous girls found on the mesa who were also running drugs?
Oh yeah, I believe that. I believe that drug activity is at the heart of why these girls were targeted.
Diana Valdez is an investigative reporter who's written about the disappearances and murders of hundreds of women in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, just hours south of Albuquerque, across the Mexican border.
The Mexican drug cartels, in particular, are the ones that operate in the Juarez-El Paso border and that also operate in Albuquerque, tend to use women to carry the drugs, collect money, and to send terrifying messages to the community.
So how do they send messages through women?
They kill them, mutilate and kill them to reinforce their status. We're here, we're doing business, and nobody better mess with us because this is what can happen to your women. What was startling to me about that is we know that women had their breasts cut off, and then we see the first femicides in Juarez had that trademark, had that signature.
Jamie Varela's mother would confirm that her 15-year-old daughter had in fact been mutilated.
They took me in the room when her breasts were cut off, and 3 of her fingers and 3 of her toes. So it's a very strong likelihood that we're dealing with narco-terrorism. The conditions that existed back then continue now, then you're going to have more graveyards like this.
Do you believe there's a second burial site?
There's probably more than a second burial site. There are probably several. By the mountains, by the river. It's just so vast. It's very easy to hide a body.
On the finale of the killing season. The crazy thing is,
Narco-terrorism is something